Hey friends, this is Marilyn from TarotClarity.com. And the other day, someone who follows me on Instagram commented on a post that I posted probably at least a year ago regarding a few cards that I was comparing between their Vergnano tarot deck and Il Tarocco Bizzarro. Now, the Vergnano deck was originally created in Turin, or Piedmont, the northern region of Italy. And I think the date from memory is like 1830. I should have checked before I started. Yeah, it's 1830. And then, of course, the Tarocco Bizzarro is a more modern deck created by a modern artist who I believe has since passed away, but he was born in 1935 and his name was Franco Bruna. And I hope I haven't prematurely deceased him, but I do believe he recently, in recent years, passed away. And the few cards that I had compared prompted him, to say, oh, I always wanted to see those two cards side by side. And I'm always looking for good content for tarot videos. So I thought I would follow up and do a side-by-side comparison between the Vergnano and the Il Tarocco Bizzarro. So let me flip the camera and we'll compare these side by side. The Bruna deck, I don't know what year the Bruna deck was created. The box doesn't say. Let me look in the book. Wow, I don't have a date in the book either. And the book is written in Italian. Ah, here we go. There is an English section, but I don't think the English section tells us when it was created either. So I don't know when the Bruna deck was created. Sorry. So let me flip the camera and we'll get to it. Now I notice on my channel that when I do novelty decks or decks that aren't strictly historic decks, there's a big drop in viewership. And, I understand that because I guess primarily most of my subscribers come to see historic decks. And I have already shown the Vergnano, I'm pretty sure. If I haven't, then today's a good day to see it. But, tarot history is still being made, and every new deck that's being made is part of that history. And I think it's remiss to ignore that. And even though novelty decks, as the Tarocco Bizzarro would classify, I mean, this is done by an artist who was a caricaturist who did, funny, political cartoons, and such. We really don't know to what degree what we call historic decks were also novelty decks, and now we sort of just revere them. Now, the Vergnano isn't that old. It comes after the Versailles, and the Marseille, and it also comes considerably after the original Italian decks. So keep in mind that the term historic is a relative term. Now the first two cards, or the first card for each, is the Fool. And we do know that the first time the butterfly ever appeared in the Fool card was in the Vergnano. And we would consider this, I think a Piedmontese tarot deck. So Bruna kind of honors the Italian tradition, or the northern Italian tradition, and includes the butterfly. But we also see the dog, which came in other decks. We notice a nod to other decks also, where the shoes or the boots are different. And here the Fool, Il Matto, the one of marginal brain power, he's quite playful. He's got a net, he's trying to catch the butterfly, the dog is biting at his pants. In the Vergnano, the Fool is a little more dignified, but we do have the key ingredient of the butterfly. And they both label the Fool as 0 rather than unnumbered. So for Il Bagato, we have the same name. And the lemniscate, which is created in the Bruna deck, it could kind of be hinted at in the older hat of the Vergnano. Now the Vergnano is more like a cobbler, like he has a hammer and he's got tools of his trade. Whereas in the novelty deck, he does seem to be more of a sleight of hand trickster. You see that the cup is being poured not by himself, but through magic. The female pope has, the tradition of the three-tiered crown, although I don't see a three-tiered crown in the Vergnano. And also the drapery behind the female pope and the book. But we also have these little kind of dragon kind of creatures, lion dragon creatures, which adds a bit of whimsy. She's got the usual ingredients of her wand. In this case, it's more of a scepter, and the shield with the eagle. But we see, the moon, which is more of a nod to more recent historic decks. I apologize if you hear the noise outside. The windows are closed, but one of my neighbors has a motorcycle and sometimes it makes noise. Okay, so we have the emperor facing in the same direction. Of course, he has his scepter and his globe, just as in most tarot decks. In this case, they're separate. In this case, they're together. And we don't see the eagle in the Bruna. We have a partial eagle in the Vergnano. So we have the columns or the pillars in common. There's a lily in the Vergnano, which I don't think we see here. And we have the two individuals, but this is kind of vague. In this case, it almost looks like decoration on his knees, and drapery. But I believe that they would have been acolytes, or cardinals, or those who have made a pilgrimage to see the popes, to ask for the pope's presence. So I'm not really sure what's being represented here, if it is a reference to people coming to see the pope, or if it's some kind of misunderstanding of the drapery or the clothing on the Pope. But in this deck, we don't see any of the, we don't see pilgrims before the Pope. And in the Bruna, we only have two. We only have the couple themselves and not the third party, as we would have seen in the Marseille. And the consistent appearance of Eros or Cupid. Oh, wait a second. So we do have a third party. I apologize. This is not a second woman, but it's kind of hard to know that these two do look like women. Of course, he looks like a woman too, so I don't want to speak out of turn about what we're looking at. But this looks more clearly like a heterosexual pair and a male king. He has a crown. And I'm guessing that these are two women because of their clothing, and that the gentleman in the center is a fella. And Gliamonte means the lover. It's not plural, so it's referencing a singular individual. Now the Chariot really doesn't have much in common in these two cards. We have a frontal view of the Vergnano, and in the Bruna, it's going toward the right, which would be really, helpful in a reading to see the direction that the charioteer is going in. Whatever card would be to the right of this card could be a modifier, right? So remember, it's not just the meaning of a card, but it also has to do with the way they're facing. Now, in a card that faces us, as the charioteer does and as justice often does, the admonishment seems to be to us, or the information seems to be directed to us. But whenever a card is facing another card, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like being modified, or where it's going is what it becomes important. So I know I've mentioned this many times in my videos, that it's not just the meaning of the card, but it's also, looking at placement and what's near it and what a card is looking at. Now here, Justice is looking off. In the Noble, I think in some of the Marseille decks, she confronts us head on. Here she's looking in the opposite direction. But she does have her sword and her virtuous wings in this one. This is a little more ambiguous. Is it the back of a chair, or was it wings? We have the scale. And we have the lantern rather than the sundial. Or not the sundial, the hourglass. And we have a bird here. Now this hermit looks a bit like a monk, as he has rosary. It looks like rosary. But here he looks more like a wanderer. He's got like the back of a snail. So Lady Fortune, or the Wheel of Lady Fortune, we have, what we kind of recognize in the Marseille. And here we have a much more whimsical where the monkey on top is pooping on the monkey on the bottom. Sometimes we get pooped on and sometimes we do the pooping. But they're both individuals of stature. They both wear crowns, but sometimes you're on top of the world and sometimes you're not. Now the contrast here appears to be between a female in fortitude and a male. And the lion being much more fierce in the more modern deck. So, fortitude being a virtue is not, reinforced with any kind of wings, although she does have that kind of lemniscate looking hat. And here, this is more of a reference, I'm sure, to Hercules. So it does seem that we have a similarity in that we have the Piedmontese face, right, in the belly. And as in the Pope of the Vergnano, we have acolytes or, worshippers or people who perhaps made a pilgrimage to have a meeting with this fellow, although they are now tethered, so they're not free to come and go. They appear to be more tethered. And here, they're not tethered. But he still has his sidekicks. I guess they're more like sidekicks here. Although the expression on these faces don't look upset. In this one, we have 8 stars. In this one, we have 7. And in the moon card, we don't have the crayfish or the lobster, and we only have 1 dog. So far, they're not very similar, other than that they have a few cards in common. And I never showed the backs. I do apologize. We wouldn't expect the backs to be the same since they're separated by 150 years or whatever. And I hope I did not neglect to identify the Vergnano, this particular one, as having been edited or curated by Giordano Berti. So when Gabriel blows his horn, you better be ready. Now, I've never cared for the world card being represented by a central figure with the mandala. And so, you know, with the 4 creatures in the corners. So I always appreciate when someone bothers to make it different. Even though there are the elements of the evangelists, right? We have that, the symbols of those. And we have what looks like a crown here, but I don't know, maybe it's a crescent moon. And here it's definitely a crescent moon. She's definitely an earth mama. Well, many decks have the hand coming from the right side. Okay, so we are departing ways in that we have the scimitars for the suit of swords in the Vergnano, whereas the Bruna is more like daggers. And we have a castle and a moon and a sun. So I will suffice it to say that the suit of swords will carry on in this way, where they're not really consistent with the historic deck. But you may want to see it anyway. So I'm going to show it. And I thank you for those of you who stick with me to the end of my videos. I know my watch time is not always very long. People lose interest and fade out soon, but you never know what I'm going to say. Sometimes in the very last minute, I have a lot of insight, you know. And also, it's only by comparing. Oh, that's really cool. Look at that. It's by comparing decks that I really learned what I know. I never had the benefit of anyone instructing me. I had books. I read a lot. But it was hands-on looking at decks. And if you're not in a position to buy decks, you know, then I would like to be helpful to you in being the one who shows you the decks, you know. And at any time, if any of you ever want me to show something I have or to look something up in a book that I have, please, I live for this stuff. I'm happy to do it. So please, you know, don't hesitate to ask me. And I appreciate having ideas because I don't always, oops, I messed up. Oh no, that is the queen. I don't always, you know, have an idea. And then I don't, you know, I don't do a video because I just don't know what to do. And so I appreciate it if every now and then somebody says, could you show me this? Now in the novelty deck of Bruna, we see that the king is not ancient, but he's older because he has a beard. In the Vergnano, he's a younger man. And he has the epaulets of the charioteer, doesn't he? Now in the Ace of Cups, we do see a rather big nod in the newer deck to the older one. This is definitely a Piedmontese thing, an Ace of Cups with flowers. That's definitely a Piedmont thing or a Northern Italy thing. We have the king and queen appearing here also. I always like the Piedmontese Ace of Cups. It's so pretty. Now this almost looks like the 3, right, of cups, because this almost looks like a 3rd cup, but I can see why it would be confusing, especially if you're playing the game. But it is the 2. And, you know, we see the ribbing on the chalices or the cups, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Swiss design. If you look at some Swiss chalices or Swiss cups, you see that there's a similarity to the ribbing of the cups. And here you see we clearly have the 3 of Cups in the Vergnano. And the placement of the cups are different. It's not adhering to a similar. And thankfully in the 4, we have the numbers on the cards here so that we don't mistake this as a cup if you're playing. And even if you're interpreting the cards. So clearly we have a different positioning and a layout. You know, it happens when you're interpreting cards and your brain sometimes plays tricks on you. It does to me. I'm not a perfect, but my rule of thumb over the years has been however I perceive it at the time of the reading is the perception is what I received from the universe. And so that's what I go with, is what I perceived at the time. Now, if I catch my mistake during the reading, that's different and I correct myself. However, the first interpretation is still an aspect of the reading that I would like the person to go home with, but then it only gives me a second understanding. If I catch a mistake that I made, if I thought this was the 7, or if I thought this was the 6 or something and it really was the 7, you know what I'm saying? Then sometimes if my perception makes a mistake, then I give both meanings, once I recognize my mistake. But if I don't recognize the mistake during the reading, however my perception is how the reading stands. And that's just been my rule of thumb, because no one is perfect and we all make mistakes, and it doesn't invalidate the reading at all, because what I ask when I set forth to do a reading is to ask the universe to give me the information I need and for my higher self to understand it in the most meaningful way. And so if I make an error, it's just part of that process. Sometimes people will say, oh my gosh, Marilyn, you have all these decks, and oh my gosh. Well, do bear in mind that it took me 50 years to amass, my collection of hundreds. I have hundreds of decks, I admit that. And so we do see my boyfriend with the cloth that's covering the chalice. So he does have that nod. He is not carrying a hat in his hand in the novelty deck, as he clearly is in this deck. He has a wreath in his hair, as is typical, and he has a very elaborate headpiece here. But, these tarot decks that I have, I didn't collect them, overnight. It's taken nearly 50 years, maybe 47 to be exact. And some years were lean. I mean, I raised children in the 90s, 80s and 90s, and I didn't have much money. So I stuck with just maybe a handful of decks. Maybe I only had 5 or 6 decks for at least a decade or two. It wasn't until, as my children got older and took off and didn't need me as much, that I was able to pursue my own desires, and I was able to put money in the things for myself, that I sacrificed, really, as all mothers do, that you don't, baby needs a new pair of shoes, and I had twins. I had 3 children, but, I had twins, so I had 3 kids in 3 years, so there was always a case of baby needs shoes. Now here, well, we see the Vergnano, the original. This is a facsimile, I think, as close to a facsimile as one can have. There is blurriness, in the original, so there is like ink, We have a window here, and we do have a curtain. And she has a feather in her hand. Oh, no, excuse me, just her wand. And here she does not wear a crown, but she has feathers in her hair, and she has a hare, a rabbit, which is interesting. You don't see a rabbit in this one, and there is no window. And the king's in the suit of cups of either deck, look in the opposite direction of the other. This king is faced in one direction. His body is posed. His legs are kind of posed. Well, it's a little bit askew, and almost expect that his body is going one way, but his mind is going another. And that's also something to read and interpret, especially if it's, when you see this in a reading, it's not just the King of Cups, but it's also to be noted, in my mind, as I would do it, is that your body says one thing, but your mind says another. Now see, if you hadn't stayed in here for 31 minutes and 49 seconds, you never would have gotten that. So I think it's beneficial to hang in there sometimes. So the flickers, I think occultists have a name for them. Maybe, I forget what the name is. I used to know, but I don't remember. Are kind of represented in the ends of the baton. So the ingredients are there, right? It's just that it's in a much more stylized presentation. And a lot of times, especially when people are new to PIP style cards or TDM style, they will get, and I've seen it a lot of times in seasoned readers where, one of the mistakes they make is in, misreading this as swords, when it's batons. And just bear in mind that typically the swords are curved and the batons are straight. And in this case, we have more of a Spanish flair of cudgels or clubs, that we see in the Spanish decks. So there is a departure. And the Vergnano is a bit traditional with the, the batons being straight and then the odd numbers having a center baton. And as we've seen all along in the Bruna, the distribution and the layout of the suits is much more different. And here we have a little creature, a little fellow, a little jester. And look here, we have a fly. And any additional ingredient, serves a purpose in interpretation, right? Could be a fly in the ointment. I mean, I don't see ointment, but you see what I'm saying. There could be a fly. I see the suit of batons as, like a social order, or a group of people participating in something. Maybe it's office work, or maybe it's just weekend activities, right? So it could be seen as like a fly or a glitch in an activity. Maybe if it's surrounded by water, maybe it'll mean that the activity will be, delayed because of rain or something like that. So it's not just the number and the suit. You also do want to pay attention to what is on the card. But with pips, since many times they are really they are, most frequently represented by number and suit. If you have an understanding of number and suit, then you do have a really good foundation for understanding the card. But whatever, you can take from the image itself, certainly is a valid additional way to interpret the card. Now here we have a dog again. And again, like the king of the suit of, I think it was cups, the will is going one way, but the mind of the horse and the rider are going in another direction. Whereas here, they're both in agreement. And again, the king, now here the king is older. He's not, he's a very mature king with his gray hair. And here he's a younger man. And this is our last suit, the suit of coins. Now in the Vergnano, I don't know if it's a nod to a particular coin, but there for a while I was collecting coins in a tarot deck, and I was trying to find the coin of this Vergnano deck. Now I found a coin that was much older. I mean, this is from the 1200s or 1300s. So this coin is considerably older than what is probably being represented in this deck. But you can see, let me see, can you see that? The flower? It's a very old coin. But you can see let me see if I can get this, there we go. So you see the flower, and then you see the triangular embellishment around the center. And we see that here, right? We see a flower, and then it's embellished with triangular shapes around it. Now see, if you'd have bailed out on me, you wouldn't have gotten that. I've collected a lot of coins, in pursuit of tarot decks. And I have a coin from the Visconti Sforza clan, their trademark coin, the coin that, represents their family. I have that, and I've shown it a few times. So in the Bruna deck, we just, have whimsical, I don't know if it's representing a particular individual in Italian society that maybe I would have known had I been Italian. And it's got a cricket. So this, meaning could vary from what I would normally say if I had laid the two of coins from the Vergnano deck. Here it might be, this guy is all talk, but action is like the sound of crickets, right? So this suit of coins is fun in the Bruna deck because we have unusual embellishments and, of course, a different layout of the coin. And here we more clearly see the style of this coin. So this coin might have, the style of this coin might have, I don't know what's on this side. Let me see. It's similar. But this style of coin, you know, could have been a feature, you know, of Italian money for a very long time, for maybe an inconsequential, you know, amount. I get the sense that this is just, you know, like literally like 6 cents, you know, 6 pennies. The Vergnano is easier at a glance because you can see more clearly this is 9, you know, and here maybe 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. You have to do it in your head real quick, unless you're accustomed to looking at this deck, and then in which case, you know, here you see 2 groups of 5, so your brain can quickly, you know, say 10, and then you have the 10 up here. Here you know that there's a lot of coins on either side, so you can assume it's a 10 because it looks like a 10 and it's an even number. So we have a cricket here, and he's got a sack of coins. I wish that the Bruna had come with some information. It didn't even come with the date it was made. Because I would like to understand the symbolism that Bruna, the artist, used, what he was thinking. We have a rooster. And again, bear in mind that some of these images, these caricatures in the Bruna, could have been very deliberate in identifying individuals in politics or sports or whatever that as an American I don't recognize. So if any of you are Italian and you know that, and Flavio, if you're watching, I would appreciate any insight you might have. And there you have it, friends. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and until next time, peace and stay well.